At my sister's baby shower, my fam mocked me for being childless. My mother laughed, maybe you're just not meant to be a mom. But as they unwrapped gifts, my sister froze, holding a paper I had slipped into one of the boxes. Her face went white, and then she screamed, "This can't be true." Because what she had just read would change everything. I never wanted to be the odd one out in my family. But as the years passed, that's exactly what I became. I'm Camille Harrington, 39 years old, divorced, and, according to my family, too caught up in her job to settle down. I run a small independent publishing house in Charleston, South Carolina, a business I built from the ground up. It's not glamorous. But I love what I do. I spend my days bringing other people's stories to life, yet my own life feels like a closed book, one no one ever cared to read. My younger sister, Megan, was the golden child. The daughter who did everything right. She married at 27, a big church wedding with hundreds of guests, and now, at 34, she was expecting her first baby. She and her husband, Derek, had just moved into a beautiful home in Mount Pleasant, just a few minutes from where we grew up. Everything about Megan's life seemed effortless, like she was following a perfectly scripted plan. The baby shower was held at my mother's house, a place filled with memories that had started to feel less like home over the years. The house was a classic Southern colonial, white shutters, a big wraparound porch. The kind of place that looked warm and inviting, but inside, secrets were buried under the polished wooden floors. I arrived late, stepping inside to find the house already packed with guests. Women in pastel dresses, laughter, glasses of champagne clinking together. Megan was glowing, her hands resting on her round belly as she greeted everyone. My mother, Jean, was in her element, playing the perfect host, moving through the crowd with ease, accepting compliments about how wonderful Megan looked, how lucky she was, how beautiful everything had turned out. I found myself lingering near the back of the room. Sipping a mimosa I didn't really want. I had been through this before. I knew how it would go. And then, right on cue, someone turned the conversation toward me. "Camille, when are you finally gonna give your mom a grandbaby?" It was Bridget, our cousin. She was perched on the couch, smirking over the rim of her drink. A few people laughed, the question light-hearted but pointed. I felt my mother's gaze land on me. I started, but before I could say anything, Aunt Lorraine, my mother's sister, chimed in. "Maybe she's just not meant to be a mom." The words hit like a slap. A sharp sting buried under a casual chuckle. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. I had heard it before. I had let it slide before. But something inside me cracked at that moment. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that I had spent the past few years silently grieving something they would never understand. Or maybe I was just tired of being the family disappointment. I cleared my throat. "Well, I did try," I said, voice even. "Remember?" Silence. The room shifted. A few people averted their eyes. Megan looked uncomfortable. My mother let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking her head. "Oh, come on, Camille," she said. "Are we really going to do this today?" She waved a hand as if brushing the topic away, as if it was nothing. A few years ago, I tried IVF. It had been one of the hardest things I had ever done, months of injections. Appointments, emotional highs, and devastating lows. And in the end, it didn't work. The doctors hadn't been able to explain why. They had simply told me that there were genetic factors at play that made it difficult. I was devastated. But instead of support, my family had acted like it was my fault. Like I had chosen this. Like I was broken. Megan, ever the peacemaker, tried to redirect the conversation. "Let's open presents," she said, her voice a little too bright. And so, the gifts were unwrapped one by one. Many baby clothes, plush blankets, picture books. Megan smiled and gasped at each one, thanking everyone, her happiness filling the room. My mother beamed, soaking in the joy of her younger daughter's perfect life. And then Megan reached for my gift. A simple white box, neatly wrapped. Nothing extravagant. She pulled off the ribbon, lifted the lid. Inside, instead of a onesie or a toy, was a single folded piece of paper. I watched as she unfolded it, expecting her to smile, maybe laugh, ask what it was. But instead, her face was drained of color. A hush fell over the room. Megan stared at the paper. Her hands trembled. Then she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "This can't be true." Her breath hitched. The silence grew heavy. My mother frowned, stepping forward. "What is it?" Megan turned to look at me, eyes wide, pleading. "Camille, tell me this is a joke." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Bridget, always one to snoop, grabbed the paper and skimmed it before covering her mouth. A choked gasp. Then she handed it to my mother. I watched my mother's face shift, confusion first, then something else. Something darker. She inhaled sharply. Where did you get this? I set my glass down carefully, my hand steady. It's a DNA test, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Mine. And yours. A few murmurs rippled through the room. Megan clutched her stomach as if physically bracing herself. This says, she swallowed, her voice trembling. It says we're only half-sisters. A sharp inhale from someone in the back of the room. My mother's expression darkened. Camille, I cut her off. It also says that Dad wasn't my biological father. A pin could have dropped in that room. Megan let out a shaky breath. Her hands clutched the paper as if willing to words to change. My mother's face hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. My voice is stronger now. I had spent months unraveling this. It had started with a simple ancestry test, a curiosity. I hadn't expected anything shocking. But the results had been wrong. My DNA didn't match my father's side of the family at all. Not even a little. So I had dug deeper. And deeper. Until I found the truth my mother had spent decades hiding. Megan turned to our mother, tears in her eyes. Mom, is it true? My mother's lips pressed together. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, finally, she let out a long breath. A single whispered confession. Yes. Megan inhaled sharply. A few people gasped. Amphilarine looked stunned, her usual smug expression wiped away. I felt my stomach twist. Even knowing, even suspecting, I had still wanted to believe she'd deny it. That there was some other explanation. But there wasn't. I wasn't my father's daughter. I had spent my life feeling like something was missing, like I didn't belong. And all along, she had known. Megan wiped at her eyes, still gripping the paper. Then who was Camille's father? The room waited. My mother didn't answer. Because she didn't know. The air felt heavy. Suffocating. Megan turned away, her hands shaking. The baby shower, the perfect celebration, was over. And just like that, everything had changed. For all of us. And I wasn't done yet. Because now, I was going to find out who I really was. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, like the walls themselves were closing in. No one spoke. No one moved. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, pulsing with unspoken words and held back emotions. Megan's breathing was uneven. Her fingers clutched the edge of the dining table as if she needed something solid to keep her from crumbling. Her gaze darted back and forth between me and our mother, as if trying to make sense of what had just been revealed. This can't be real, she murmured, shaking her head slightly. It doesn't make sense. My mother, Jean, stood rigid, her back straight, her hands gripping the chair in front of her. The carefully curated warmth she had displayed all afternoon was gone. In its place was something cold, something almost unreadable. She was calculating, trying to find a way to put the lid back on this, to shut it all down before it spun further out of control. I knew that look. I had seen it before. Camille, she said finally, her voice unnervingly calm, you shouldn't have done this here. I let out a dry, bitter laugh. You mean, I shouldn't have exposed you here? Her jaw tightened. Megan turned to her, still gripping the paper. Mom, tell me the truth. Who was Camille's father? Jean opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Megan, she started, but Megan shook her head. No. No more excuses. No more, we'll talk about this later. Just tell me. Right now. Jean's lips pressed into a thin line. Her fingers curled against the chair, knuckles white. I don't know. The words hung in the air like poison. A sharpened hill from someone in the back of the room. A murmur. A stifled gasp. I felt my chest tighten, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. You don't know. My voice was quiet, but the rage underneath it was unmistakable. Jean exhaled slowly, pressing her fingertips to her temples as if this was all just some great inconvenience. It was a long time ago, she said finally. I was young. I was stupid. I made a mistake. A mistake. That was what I was to her. A mistake. The room was still. No one dared to move, to speak, to break the tension that hung over us like a storm waiting to explode. Megan's voice was barely above a whisper. So, what? You chatted? Jean didn't answer. She didn't have to. My stomach twisted. I swallowed back the lump in my throat, my mind racing. My whole life, I had felt like something was off. Like there was a disconnect between me and my family that I could never quite put into words. My mother always favored Megan. Not in an obvious way, but in a way that I felt deeply. The way she would brush off my accomplishments but beam at Megan's. The way she would tell me I was too much, while Megan was always just right. I had thought it was just family dynamics. That I was difficult, hard to love. But now, standing there, watching my mother avoid my eyes, I realized the truth. I had never really belonged. And she had known it all along. Megan ran a shaky hand through her hair, her face pale. Who was he? She asked, her voice unsteady. Jean hesitated. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, I snapped. It matters a lot. Jean closed her eyes briefly, as if trying to summon patience. When she opened them again, her expression was unreadable. He was just someone. It wasn't serious. I never saw him again. The words hit me like a physical blow. That was it. That was all she had to say. My entire existence, who I was, where I came from, boiled down to a careless affair with a nameless man. A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. You've got to be kidding me. Jean exhaled sharply, frustrated now. What do you want me to say, Camille? Do I regret it? That I wish it never happened? She shook her head. It was decades ago. It's done. You're here. What difference does it make? What difference does it make? I stared at her, disbelief and anger and something dangerously close to grief rising inside me. It makes all the difference, I said, my voice thick. Because I've spent my whole life trying to fit into a family that wasn't mine. Jean's expression faltered for the briefest moment. But then, just as quickly, she shut down again. You are part of this family. No, I said, shaking my head. I was just the consequence of your secret. Megan let out a shaky breath beside me. She looked lost, like the ground beneath her had shifted, like she no longer knew where she stood. I can't believe this, she whispered. Jean pinched the bridge of her nose. I didn't want this to come out like this. Then how did you want it to come out? I shot back. Where were you planning to take this secret to your grave? Silence. I already knew the answer. Jean never planned to tell me. If it weren't for that DNA test, she never would have. I felt a hole in a settle in my chest. A deep, aching loss for something I never truly had. Megan turned to me, her eyes searching mine. What are you going to do? I took a breath, steadying myself. I'm going to find him, I said. My real father. Whoever he is. Jean's head snapped up, eyes wide. Camille, no. Yes. Her lips parted slightly, panic flickering across her face for the first time that night. Camille, she said, stepping closer, her voice lowering as if she could contain this. She could reel it back in. There's no point. He's probably long gone. And even if he's not, you don't know what you'll find. That's the thing, Mom, I said, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. I'd rather know the truth, no matter how ugly, than live a lie. She exhaled, shaking her head slightly. Her hands trembling at her sides. I could see it now. The cracks. The fear. She was afraid. Because she knew that once I started searching, I would uncover more than just the identity of my father. I would find out everything. And she couldn't stop me. Megan looked between us, her own face torn with emotion. Camille, if you find something, will you tell me? I nodded. Of course. She swallowed, then reached out, hesitating before squeezing my hand. The gesture nearly broke me. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if Megan and I would come out of this still being sisters. Jean turned away, her back stiff, her shoulders set. A part of me thought she might say something. One last desperate attempt to control the situation. But she didn't. She just walked out of the room. And as I stood there, watching her disappear down the hallway, I realized something. This wasn't just a revelation. This was a war. And it had only just begun. The baby shower had ended in disaster. Guests had left in stunned silence, their polite smiles wiped away, their murmurs trailing behind them like whispers in the wind. Megan had gone upstairs, shutting herself in her old bedroom. My mother had disappeared down the hall, leaving me standing alone in the wreckage of a celebration that was never meant for me in the first place. I didn't linger. I walked out of that house with the DNA result still clutched in my hand. My fingers curling so tightly around the paper that it crinkled. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove, no destination in mind, just the need to get away. To breathe. To think. The weight of the revelation pressed against my chest. My mother didn't know who my father was. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't want to tell me. Either way, it left me in the same place, with nothing. But I wasn't going to accept that. For the next few weeks, I buried myself in research. I dug through public records, scoured old documents, and even reached out to distant relatives I barely knew, hoping to find a missing piece. I sent messages on ancestry websites, took another DNA test to expand my search, and called every clinic and doctor's office that might have information from that time. I was relentless. And then, one afternoon, I got an email. It was from a man named Howard Gaines, living in Savannah, Georgia. "I think we might be related," he had written. "Would you be open to talking?" I stared at the message for a long time, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. I responded immediately. Within a day, we were on a video call. Howard was in his late 60s, with a strong jawline and deep-set eyes that looked strangely familiar. He had a slow, thoughtful way of speaking, his words deliberate, careful. He had taken a DNA test on a whim, looking to build out his family tree. And then my name came up as a close match. Very close. As we talked, something inside me started to settle. Howard had been stationed in Charleston for a brief time in the early 1980s. He had a short-lived romance with a woman, Camille Harrington. He never knew she was pregnant. He never even knew she had a child. The realization hit me like a wave. This was my father. Howard was stunned but open to knowing more. Over the next few weeks, we exchanged messages, then phone calls, then eventually met in person. He wasn't perfect, no one was, but he was kind, straightforward, and genuinely curious about me. And unlike my mother, he didn't lie. He told me about his life, his other children, my half-siblings, who had grown up in a world I had never been part of. They were shocked but welcoming, cautiously excited about the idea of having a sister they never knew existed. I was stepping into a whole new world, one my mother had stolen from me. But I wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just about finding my father. It was about making sure my mother faced the consequences of what she had done. The revenge gene had spent her whole life carefully constructing an image of perfection. A devoted mother. A pillar of the community. The gracious host, the loving matriarch. She thrived on control, on managing perceptions, keeping secrets buried beneath a charming southern smile. So I decided to take that control away from her. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply started talking. I told Megan everything. Every lie. Every deception. How our mother had looked me in the eye for decades, knowing the truth, and still let me believe I was the problem. That I was defective. Megan listened. And for the first time, she saw our mother for who she really was. I went further. I reached out to family members, cousins, aunts, old family friends. I didn't spread rumors. I simply told the truth. I let the weight of my mother's own actions do the damage. The story spread like wildfire. Jean tried to control it, of course. She made excuses, downplayed it, and insisted I was exaggerating. But it didn't work. The image she had spent years curating started to crumble. And then came the final blow. Howard, my father, wanted to meet Megan. He wanted to be involved. He wasn't trying to replace anyone, but he was ready to be part of my life. And Megan, to my mother's horror, agreed to meet him. That was the breaking point. Jean couldn't handle it. The idea of her two daughters forming a bond with the man she had spent decades erasing from existence. It shattered her. The last time I saw her, she was sitting alone in her perfectly decorated living room, her hands gripping the arms of her chair as if holding on to the last remnants of control. She looked smaller somehow. Defeated. She didn't beg. She didn't apologize. She just sat there, staring past me. As if she had finally realized she had lost. Because she had. I walked out of her house that day knowing that, for once, she was the one left behind. She had spent years making me feel like an outsider in my own family. Now, she was an outsider. And I had finally found where I belonged. As I stepped outside, the warm Charleston breeze brushed against my skin, carrying with it the scent of salt and magnolias. For the first time, I wasn't leaving with unanswered questions or the weight of my mother's lies pressing down on me. She had built a life on secrets, but the truth had unraveled it all. And the best part? She had no one to blame but herself.
Good morning， 早安，妈妈们。借我你那个麦试一下。 你们收到了这个 Oxford Dictionary Pen 没有啊 ？E 卡姆斯就是上次 Kobe Daddy 跟这个 E 卡姆斯配合，然后开卖的这个 E 卡姆斯。就是 E 卡姆斯我自己呢也有买一套给我的孩子，然后呢我也买一套送给